Dear students, let us start the discussion on today's newspaper, that is 14th March 2016. So in relation to this, let us try to understand what are the important articles which are there in economy in Indian Express. The rupee devaluation not the right tool to boost the exports. You know that the China has went through the currency devaluation as a mechanism to boost its exports. The overcapacity is created over there and falling exports and NPS of the banks in China have led to a huge fall in the growth. India also is seeing a fall in growth, especially the export growth. So in this context, many people have suggested for rupee devaluation. Even the economic survey, though it did not directly state for the rupee devaluation, RBI has to be innovative in increasing the exports. That's what is the economic survey suggested for. So in this case, Raghuram Rajan has clearly stated that the fall in exports is not a situation typical for India. It is a worldwide phenomenon with the ongoing economic crisis. So in this context, India need not worry much about that because the fall in exports in India is also due to the fall in value of the currency. Let us observe this. India's currency rupee has lost 6% about the against the US dollar, but many of the emerging markets lost more than 6%. That is the reason why our products have become a bit uncompetitive. So in this context, the road to consolidation or rupee consolidation, it has to be on three lines. One is capital flows, macroeconomic stability, and also removing the structural bottlenecks of the economy and providing for greater productivity and removing the bottlenecks that are there for the ease of doing business in this country. So providing a business climate which can attract the foreign investments is the solution in the long run. And added to that, maintaining a huge foreign exchange reserves or stability of the forex reserves also provides a space for us to operate. So that's what is he recommended for. The competitive devaluation across the world is going to make us all blind. So that's the reason why the competitive devaluation is a vicious cycle which the country shall not get into. That's what Raghuram Rajan suggested for. And next is on the reforms front. The government started now talking about the GST bill, insolvency and bankruptcy bill. These are the two the government is expected to pass in this particular session, which can be seen as a dramatic improvement with regard to the environment or the tax environment in India is concerned. Now coming to the heading backwards. So it is about GM crops. The GM cotton is said to be one of the reasons for huge cotton output, and the growth is 178% between 2000 to 2014. So the cotton output has increased dramatically because of the GM crops. So in this context, what it has been suggested is the government's unnecessary involvement in the GM seed pricing is pulling away the private sector, especially the multinational corporations, from it. Now, if India has to retain these benefits of cotton production, which was actually a net exporter of the cotton now, India has to create a favorable environment for these multinational companies to operate. Because as our budgets towards the agriculture, especially the research, is decreasing, so the private sector expenditure is increasing. So it means that the future innovations in agricultural sector is going to come from majorly from the private sector. So it means India shall make its regulatory framework ready for that. That is what is the heading backwards. And this article talks about compulsory licensing. What is the meaning of compulsory licensing? Under the intellectual property rights TRIPS agreement, so there is a provision for compulsory licensing. It means that if necessary for health or other emergency reasons in India, so the patents can be overridden and a commercial permission can be given to another private entity to produce the same good. So this is what is called compulsory licensing. Many countries view it as against the intellectual property, and it is not a favorable condition towards the property rights in the country. Now coming to the reality check, this is what is the article which I am going to cover over here. So what it says is about the that is real estate regulation bill. So now what are the provisions of this? So you will have a regulatory authority where the builder, buyer and this agents, everyone has to be registered with. And second is the buyer has to give a clear plan to the regulatory authority. Any changes in plan, it has to be two-thirds approval of its members. And an account has to be created and 70% of the money has to be deposited in the account and they have to be used only for the construction. And the next is the 5 years after this, after completion of the building, the post-construction maintenance and structural defects need to be, the maintenance what I mean is structural defects need to be addressed by the builder. A punishment of 3 years can be imposed if he fails to do this particular things. So it means there are two reasons why real estate sector has to be regulated. There is a lot of asymmetry of information that flows between the builder and the buyer. And second is between agreement is made and the final product is delivered, there is a lot of time gap where many distortions are made by the builder to his own advantage, which is going to keep the buyer at loss. So added to that, if you see the total GDP growth, the GDP contribution of real estate sector is around 9%. So it shows the importance of this sector. And most of the people in the unorganized sector are also involved with construction work. So, but however, these people are not being provided within the scope of this law. And second is the land is a state subject and already state center making a law on the subject is an intrusion into their list. So in this context, the transfer of the property, exchange of these things is in the concurrent list. The center has made a law under the concurrent list on this particular subject. And next is the local governments, revenue departments and their capacities are very critical for the strong implementation of the Real Estate Regulation Act. So in this context, we need to have a strong system in place. If not, the regulatory action may fall flat. And the next is the same in the Hindu. Let's say I'm continuing with the Hindu. Protecting the home buyer is the argument. The same points continue over here. Another thing is politics and builder nexus is very strong. The regulatory authority has to be strong, independent to face this politics and builder nexus. And transparency at any cost. We all know that recently in Kakrapar in Gujarat, the Kakrapar Atomic Power Energy Station, so the 220 megawatt Kakrapar Unit 1, there is a leakage of the coolant, heavy water, and it has led to its shutdown. So though the backup systems have immediately come into support, so what has led to such a failure is being inquired by the Atomic Energy Regulatory Board. So in this context, any nuclear accidents, till now they are lying in secrecy. The country has to release the information transparently. The reason is, if you observe the Japan, in the Japan, a regulator, operator and the government, all these have led to a collusion to sell the nuclear reactors or to push the nuclear reactors, which have led to the worst accidents. So in this context, so India has to take up a proper transparency norms for the disclosure of the information to the citizens. And the next is Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act. So let's understand this, the context of this article. So the fiscal deficit target is around 3% of GDP. So the Fiscal Responsibility Budget Management Act, it fixes it 3% of our GDP. So in this context, most of the cases we we are unable to have some flexibility with regard to the FRBM Act to expand the fiscal space. The point we need to remember is any planned deficit where expenditure is going on into the capital productive assets creation is good. So in this context, whenever the economy is on a slowdown path, the fiscal policy shall act as an instrument towards building the trust in the economy and also the demand in the economy. So in these circumstances, FRBM Act is coming as a limitation. So how this 3% of the GDP is derived at is also has certain stories behind it. So there is no proper rational criteria has undergone behind that. So when this bill was about to be introduced, So a standing committee under Shivraj Patil was established, and this committee said there shall be some flexibility in determining the rate to the circumstances of the day. So that is not followed on the day. And added to that, debt to GDP growth, another argument is this. When debt to GDP growth increases, then automatically it increases the interest rates and it is going to increase the revenue expenditure and it is going to increase the fiscal deficit, which is not good. So as fiscal deficit we are increasing, it means that we are increasing the public debt. So this is a counter argument why fiscal deficit has to be low. And the fiscal deficit is high. More and more money is being taken away by the government from the public pool. So it means that the crowding out of the capital, movement of the capital away from the private sector is the major challenge. So these two circumstances are the counter arguments. But however, when the economy is losing its growth momentum, the fiscal policy has to be widened. So that is globally approved. So these two have to be balanced through this article. But however, the finance minister said for the appointment of a committee to determine a band for the fiscal deficit rather than a fixed target. Now coming to the marital rape. So I'm not going to go into the marital rape and arguments over here. Just I'm going to explain that. The section 375 deals with the rape. So what it says is an intercourse between a man and wife cannot be considered as a rape and it is an exception. I mean, if the woman is greater than 15 years of age. Now, India is a signatory of Sustainable Development Goals. One among the provision is this. All forms of the violence against the woman, both in the public and private spheres, has to be eliminated. So it means the international law and also treaties, they recognize the marital rape is also a violence against the woman. In this context, the Maneka Gandhi made a statement in the parliament that based on the Indian customs, values and sacrosanctity of the marriage, we cannot recognize the marital rape as a crime. We cannot recognize, did not recognize marital rape as a violence against the woman. So in this context, what Ms. Clark of United Nations Development Program, Helen Clark, she says is this. The marital rape is an issue. It is not about the culture. It is more about the consent. So these are the things which are given by Helen Clark. Now, the waterways. Now remember, this year there will be a question in prelims about the waterways. Now what are the newly announced waterways and what are the world waterways in India? So in this case, total 50,000 kilometers of coastal and inland waterways, they are available for renewal in India. So the cost of using the waterways to transfer the goods, it is very less to the tune of around 25 paise per kilometer compared to 1.5 paise kilometer by road and 1 rupee by rail. So it means it's the cheapest alternative. And the third thing is the logistics cost through the waterways will also come down. So one of the reasons why industrial revolution has occurred in UK, because the hinterlands and the coal blocks, they are being very much connected through the waterways in those days, whatever be the case. So there is something called these waterways, if they are being developed, they play a critical role with regard to the reduction in cost of logistics and transports in India. Now, again, the government hopes to pass key law bills. So if these key bills are being passed, that is insolvency and the bankruptcy code, GST bill. So these are a positive steps towards creating a positive environment for the business and removing the terror law. And the next is the IMF chief, Ms. Lagarde, she also has recommended or praised the Aadhaar initiative in India. So these are the articles for today's discussion. Now, let us see the yesterday's question. That is, political power can be justified only by the institutionalization of social democracy. Discuss in the light of changing nature of welfare schemes. Now, first I will define what constitutes to be the social democracy and what are the provisions in the constitution with regard to the institutionalization of social democracy. That is, rights-based approach, National Food Security Act and all these things, and DPSP, equal wages, all these things I will talk about in one paragraph or else in 2 or 3 points. Now, in the changing nature of the schemes, I will talk about neoliberal model of economy, and in this, how the protection social securities are decreasing to the people. All this we will talk about in this. And further to this, the political power, or else the Ambedkar statement where the political democracy has to be associated with social and economic democracy to make the democracy complete and sustainable in the country. That becomes a conclusion to my answer. So these are the 4 steps which I try to conclude this answer. What is social democracy? What are the initiatives taken by the government to promote the social democracy? How these initiatives are changing and social protections are decreasing for poor and marginalized? And why the social democracy is necessary to be revived? So with these 4 statements, I close the answer. Thank you very much. All the best.